Hello, and welcome back to Streaming Banshees, your home for TV book club on the internet. This is Beep. You can reach me on Twitter at Beepsplain. Today's podcast is about Hometown Cha Cha Cha, episode 8. Just a reminder that we are a rewatch podcast, so there are actually spoilers for the entire series in every episode that we do. Please make sure you have finished it before you listen to any of our episodes. You can find us on our website at streamingbanshees.com or also reach us on Twitter at TV Banshees. I am joined, as always, by the lovely Cece.
Hey, everybody. You can find me on Twitter at @check. Beep, I found myself on this rewatch of episode 8 thinking a lot about the John Donne poem, No Man is an Island.
Mm-hmm.
Because in so many ways, this episode, particularly watching it again and watching Nam-suk gossiping and doing all of the things that on first watch really seemed kind of like invasive and definitely stepping over a line, it really launches this theme that we never know what is going on in other people's lives, which is one that I really carry with me from Hometown Cha 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 in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that once you got to the end of the episode with what they reveal at the end with Nam-suk. But now rewatching it, it also hit me how much it foreshadows everything that we don't know about Chief Hong's story and why he is being so reticent about what is pretty clearly, romantic feelings that are bubbling to the surface in this episode.
Right. And the way that those two contrast is interesting because outwardly, it's like you wonder what her deal is because she's so frustrating. But his, because he's outwardly so kind, even though people are curious, they don't have to constantly worry about that. Whereas Jin is like, why do people let her get away with this behavior? And it's because of what's going on underneath. She just exudes it in a way that is super annoying to everybody else.
Yeah, especially when you get to the end with the flashbacks with Nam-suk. Both Nam-suk and Chief Hong are people who, at one point, were walking around this village as a complete shell of themselves because of grief. And both of them, in different ways, found a purpose and a way to go on. For Nam-suk, it's raising money for her daughter. For Chief Hong, it's this title and persona of Chief Hong, which throughout this episode, it feels threatened, right? Like, obviously, he's jealous about Director Ji and Jin, but he's also so annoyed and insecure about Director Ji kind of stepping a little bit onto his role, right? But all of that goes so much deeper and is tied to what is sort of foreshadowed through Nam-suk's story. That community is what helped put these people back together. And it's another episode like the one earlier on with the sexual harassment story, where it's like a parable about how community should work for people to help each other, right? So you have Ha Zhang looking out for Cho-hee, you have Jin looking out for Nam-suk, and at the end of the episode, we have Chief Hong looking out for Jin, and basically like 3 crimes are prevented because people were looking out for one another. So like that earlier episode, you have that sort of on this macro level, people working together to protect each other and protect a community from the phishing scam or from this sexual predator who basically tries to attack 2 different women. But also then you have on this micro level, Shin Ha-eun is very carefully contrasting the ways that small acts can either lift people up and help love grow, or the failure to be considerate and to be thoughtful and to show love and care through acts can actually chip away at love. And so you have on the one side, the hardware store owner who's complaining about his pregnant wife, complaining about the fruit that she wants. And you have young Gook who's like, what did I ever do? And the whole story of their divorce, the mystery of Gongjin, is that he completely took his wife for granted, and she overheard him basically talking about that he settled in marrying her. And then you contrast that with Heijin and Chief Hong and Director Ji, who all express care in all of these small, considerate acts, whether it's taking care of people's injuries, taking care of people when they're sick, looking out for their safety. And it's just a really interesting contrast, the way that she is sort of showing that love is like a garden and you can tend to it and it will grow and it will flourish, or you can ignore it and not do these small things and it will wither and weeds will grow.
Yeah, and choke it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, an interesting part of that we'll get to at the end of the episode, Chief Hong is somebody who has made so much of his purpose to work through his grief and everything that happened in Seoul, like Nam Suk raising money for her daughter. His purpose is Chief Hong, and then is doing all of these acts for people. And when Director Ji kind of steps into that role, he's really kind of thrown by it. But just to bring it back to the quote, no man is an island, Chief Hong is on an emotional island. And this is really the first episode where we watch how bad he is at first at accepting help and these kinds of acts of care for himself.
When you talk specifically about his purpose, it reminds me of a song and a line from Encanto where the oldest daughter, who kind of seems to bear the brunt of the whole family's struggles, if you will, and she's super worried about the pressure that's put on her and living up to it. She literally says, I'm pretty sure I'm worthless if I can't be of service.
Mm.
And that reminds me so much of him and where he is right now. It's like, if he can't do these things, you also have obviously the issues of atonement and guilt and all that too. But the way he's built this persona, if he can't do that, then what is he? Because he's not able to be his full and his true self right now. He literally is the acts of service that he performs.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that right when that feels like it is precarious, because all of a sudden there's this really helpful, also really talented guy, and he's going around town and he's doing everything for free. You know, and then Chief Hong is physically ill. And so he's like in his house and can't perform those acts of service. That is what creates this opportunity for Heijin to basically force her way past the doorkeeper. I think that looking back on it, this episode is a turning point for him accepting someone performing these acts for him. And it's an important step along the way. Because we know that it's going to end up in a good place, it's not that it's hard to watch, but it's like a reminder of where he was. Because when we get to the end of the series, like, he's so loving and like effusive in the way that he expresses love, but you're reminded of like how he's like having to learn how to do that again because he hasn't been part of a family in so long.
Right. Yeah, and in some ways, never. I mean, or for such a short time, you know, with his young, and ultimately, though, he doesn't even know how to function as part of a cohesive unit.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a really fascinating rewatch for many, many reasons. And let's go to Nam Suk gossiping with everybody in town. This is a particularly egregious gossiping session, don't you think?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
It is a lot.
I mean, she has been all along, the amount that she steps over the line in front of people has been really like, you know, most times I have emotionally been with Heijin to be like, are you serious right now? But she is basically to everybody, all the other adults, speculating that Heijin has slept with Chief Hong. And now she's two-timing him with Director Ji. And when Mi-sun walks in the restaurant, Mi-sun is like, hold up, man. What are you talking about? It's really bad. And it's really interesting to rewatch it with this now layer of knowing this is how she fills her time because she is so alone after the death of her daughter, and that this is why everybody puts up with it.
Yeah, and that's still sad in and of itself that she I mean, for, multiple reasons, and I understand that Ha-jung later is just like, "I'd rather see her like this than the way she was," but it's still, like, not great, Bob. But
Mhm.
what it reminds me of though is, early on when Haejin first gets to town, she is saying all this horrible stuff and gets blasted because it was actually over the intercom and she didn't realize it. Whereas I feel like Namsook just says stuff like that all the time in front of everyone with no thought whatsoever. She
Yeah.
knows people are listening and she still says it.
What I like about this episode is that while Shin Ha-eun is absolutely making the point that before we sort of reflexively react to somebody acting in a way that we don't like, maybe we take a breath and think about maybe there's things going on in their lives that we don't know about and try and be compassionate and have empathy before you sort of knee jerk react to that. But on the other hand, this episode absolutely, Haejin is drawing lines about what is acceptable and what is not, in addition to being empathetic and compassionate in the end.
Absolutely. No, it does because it's one thing to consider the person and what they may be going through. It is another thing to condemn the behavior,
Mhm.
which is totally acceptable. What
Right.
she's doing is not okay. So for somebody to step up and say, "Hey, that's not okay," regardless of what that other person is going through, is legitimate.
Yeah. I mean, and community can't work unless you do that.
Right. Right. I feel like she operates almost as if this is her purpose. She's in
Mhm.
the know, even though she's making half this stuff up. I feel like that's almost the value she attempts to bring to the community of like, "Oh, if you need to know anything, you come to me." And that's how she keeps people around her. It's a horrible coping mechanism, and I do feel for her after seeing all this. It is such a strange line to try to balance.
Yeah. I mean, she is going home every day to an empty house. Her daughter's room is still filled with all of her things, right? If we remember back to episode 2, she still sits in that room with her daughter's Sailor Moon wand. So, filling her life with what's going on with everybody else, it's totally understandable, right? Because otherwise, she sits at home in that house thinking about who's gone. And, we'll get to what she must think every time she sees Juri, right? There's another girl in town that is the exact age of the daughter that she lost. So it's a constant reminder of what would my daughter be like right now, right? What band would she like? What would she be excited about? How would she be doing in school? It's a constant reminder of her loss. And that part of what Namsook chooses to do is it goes back to that Thoreau quote of there's no remedy for love but to love more. It's reaching out to Juri and doting on her and worrying about her safety. And even though Namsook is thrifty and always goes to Oyun's cafe and never orders food and always waits for the free stuff, she's willing to give her money so that Juri can buy the latest, t-shirt for DOS, right? So
Right.
and that's another thing that they play with, right? Everybody in town is complaining about how cheap she is. And you think that this whole episode until the end that she's being sort of greedy about wanting, the additional interest rate. Why doesn't she get free dumplings? Why doesn't she order from the restaurant, et cetera, et cetera? When really raising money to honor her daughter's memory for a children's hospital is her purpose. That is her acts of service in honor of her daughter's memory that keep her going, the same way that Chief Hong performing acts of service as the chief of the town gave him purpose after his loss and grief coming back from Seoul. So meanwhile, while everybody is gossiping about Haejin's sex life, she's taking care of all of their kids. like on like a Saturday morning. Like,
Yeah, do these I feel like they don't know where their children are.
they're like watching like K-pop videos and visiting the hedgehog that they keep at her house, and then like complaining that her drink offerings are not like varied enough. What I think is so interesting, Beep, is Mi-sun comes home. I want you to think back to Haejin at the beginning of this show. And Mi-sun comes in and is like, everyone is basically talking about how you're sleeping with these two guys. Her reaction is very interesting, don't you think?
I I think it's interesting in at least initially in the sense that she's like, "I cannot believe you're having this conversation in front of children."
Jerie's like, what now? Trust me, the teenager's absolutely listening to every word of that conversation.
100%. She knows exactly what's going on.
She's like, yeah, I saw that moment at the counter. I bet you are. but it's her reaction is quite measured. And I think it's interesting because 2 episodes ago, Chief Hong said, let the gossip slide.
Right. If it's not true, then why are you worried about it?
Right. And to me, what I thought is potentially 2 different things going on, and I think both can be true. The first is this is a sign of her kind of settling into the community. Like she's grown more used to the fact, you know, not only is this how a small town is, but in particular, this is the way Namsuk is.
Right. Right. She's gonna say this stuff, so just I mean, you can react to it or not react to it, but it's not like it's gonna stop.
Yeah. And then, you know, she isn't quite have the same quills up about the jealousy that maybe Chief Hong isn't interested in her. So it was kind of like rubbing salt into a wound. Like at some level, she is aware that there's like something going on with both these guys. And so, you know, it's not true that she's sleeping with both of them, but she doesn't have the same sort of knee-jerk reaction that she did before when it was kind of rubbing salt in the wound of like, oh my God, no, that's the opposite of what's going on.
And also the comments about, "I'd rather not be connected to you at all." Like, oof.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're like, this episode is laying out a lot of sort of this initial aftermath of Director G is in town. Talk to me about the surfing date.
I love that you put listen, the original 90210 is one of my favorite shows. When I was growing up, like, I will date myself a little bit. It was in syndication by the time I was in middle school, and 2 episodes aired every afternoon, but it would be, like, before I got home. So, I straight up had it scheduled to record on VHS.
Yes.
And I watched it every single day. So, going back to the surfing and the idea of Dylan and Brandon and how they were best friends, but also kinda not because 'cause they're usually fighting over somebody. I love it so much. It's like if Shin Ha-eun has ever seen that, which, I mean, I have no reason to believe she has, but it feels like it's pulled right out of that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, with Brandon first coming from Minnesota and not knowing how to surf and them learning together, and then but also we're both in love with Kelly, and, like,
Yes.
it's just the whole thing. I love it so much.
Haejin is Kelly, Chief Hong is Dylan, and Director Shi is Brandon.
Mm.
I know, it cracked me up. I mean, it's also just, you know, these 2 actors are so charming. It's so, you know, the surfing scenes are so fun. Anytime this show plays Romantic Sunday, the audience is just having a good time. But, you know, it's also fun to just see Chief Hong hanging out with somebody his age surfing, right? This is an activity that he's usually done on his own, even if there is this hilarious layer of the security guard's son and the writer sitting there being like, why does it seem like he's being hazed? and it seems like Chief Hong has a grudge. And there's like this layer of comedy. You know, he likes Director G. He is showing him how to surf. They're having a good time, but there's always this like layer of like he's annoyed. And he's annoyed because Director G has like announced his intention that he wants to ask Hae-jin out. And it's like Chief Hong doesn't know what to do with how annoyed he is.
But it's interesting because, I mean, I assume not many people just immediately take to, especially at that age, immediately take to surfing. So it's almost like this weird way for him to like get back at him and abuse him without being mean. It's like, I know you're gonna fall and I know you're gonna get beat up, and I'm just gonna laugh. It's gonna be delightful.
He also has, you know, it reminded me, Emma, a couple podcasts ago when we were talking about sort of the scene when Chief Hong was surfing on his day off. She had talked about how surfing is sort of like this almost metaphor for life. And I had forgotten that Chief Hong actually says surfing is like life. If a good wave comes along, ride it and slide off gently. Whether the waves are vicious or stagnant, accept it as it is.
The way this man can give the most sound advice that he is absolutely incapable of taking is brilliantly hilarious.
Oh, like Chief Hong, you are swimming against the wave that you're supposed to be riding right now.
Mhm. Yes, you are neither riding nor sliding off gently, my friend. You're being beat over the head consistently, and you're just coming back for more.
All right. So there is this running thread of meta where Shin Ha-eun is speaking through the character that is her ticking plot time bomb, the security guard's son. The writer is watching her boss just freaking fall off his surfboard 80,000 times. Literally, like you could be playing Wipeout.
Yeah, I mean, it's
song from the
amazing.
60s during this. And she's like, what are they filming? Is this some sort of like post-apocalyptic drama? And the security guard's son says, no, it's a comedy with a sad ending. I'm just like, oh my God. Ease the trigger for everything that makes us sob in episode 15.
So I started paying attention to specifically when he was around and when he was not, because I think this episode so far, more than any, people have called Chief Hong Dushik. And it was just interesting because that guy is never there, of course.
Of course.
But I want to say they say it about 4 or 5 times in this episode, which is very uncommon. So it's interesting to see like the almosts.
Yeah, it's meticulous. Yeah. And later on, they're going to say, when they're in the editing room, they're going to be like, no, we'll save that for a twist for the audience at the end. And so it's just so, I mean, that line on first watch made me extremely nervous about whether this was going to all end tragically. But the writer of the show is always like kind of commenting on her own narrative as she goes along. So after the surfing date, Director G, as always, is hungry and is like, let's go eat. And Chief Hong is so annoyed and it's just like, dude, I don't want to eat with you. And then Hae-jin walks up and is like, oh, thanks for brunch. Talk to me about Chief Hong in this scene.
I love when he is just an overgrown child. He is inwardly so petulant and outwardly is just, I mean, he will third wheel himself to death. He does not care. And that's not actually what ends up happening, but he would be fine with that. He literally just does not want them to be alone together. And now that he knows they were, it's like, oh, no. I not only need to know what's going on here, I will witness this. You will not be alone so far as I know.
And of course, like, he's like, brunch? What are you talking about? Like, immediately, like, the dude is about to walk away. And then, of course, he can't actually, like, what's actually bothering him is that Director G did this, like, grand, you know, kind of over the top, like, romantic act that both women are thanking him for. So, of course, what he has to do, like the scene where they were all drinking, is he has to, like, attack what he brought and whether that is a healthy meal to have at the start of the day. It's just like, oh my God, dude, you're so petty. And then there's just zero chance. There's zero chance he's going to let them go to dinner alone.
after Misan has already kind of, like, dipped out.
Right. It's just Misun is like, if she is an enabler and wants to facilitate Heijin being alone with a guy every chance she gets, Chief Hong is there to be like, well, I'm standing right here. We're going to dinner. Dinner's this way. You're like, dude, what? talk talk to me about his face when she sits down next to him instead of director Shi.
Oh, I mean, I didn't immediately notice his as much as I immediately noticed Director G's, because he so casually pulled out the chair for her, trying to be all, chivalrous, and she just plops down next to Dushik as if he wasn't even there. And I don't think she did it purposefully. I don't, I don't think she thought
No.
about it at all. It's the magnets again. They have, they're almost
Yeah.
flipped. They're
Almost flipped, almost flipped. I mean, the thing that Mi-seon said to Nam Suk earlier when they were gossiping is like, Haejin, what did she say? She's like famously never lived up to like how pretty she is, right? And she later on is like, Haejin is a dating novice. Don't you know what's going on? Why Director G is doing all this nice stuff for you? Like that guys don't just do this like for the heck of it, right? He likes you. So Haejin is sitting down and she is like, I think pretty clueless that these two guys are living and dying on every word that she says. And it's like watching this like tennis match of their emotions because they're both on this roller coaster, right? She sits down next to Chief Hong. She's going to share a menu with him. He is so smugly satisfied. It's like he is just grinning at Director G. But then as soon as the conversation turns to the past and Haejin is connecting with Director G over that, Chief Hong looks like totally insecure and is like looking back and forth between them like I mean they're just living and dying, hanging on every word that she says.
I like that that was done though in this. I like that she doesn't know that she's just being normal and not playing with them, which is something you see a lot on
Yeah.
television. Somebody might be acting like they don't know what's going on, but they're really just toying with others, and I don't like that at all. So I love that she really just is like sitting by her one friend and having a conversation with her other friend, even though there's, feelings bubbling everywhere, that she's not acting out on that.
Yeah. Talk to me about when he stuffs the dumpling in his mouth.
Oh my God. She's she doesn't want them all, right? They ordered way too much food because they had to get 3 instead of 2 because how's that gonna split? Like, it's already so dramatic. And she's like, "Oh, I can't eat this all. Here's some," and is giving it to Director G. I mean, that Chief Hong will not abide that. So he steals it out of like midair. Like, I already called dibs on that one. Like, whoa.
And stuffs the entire thing in his mouth. I mean, I first of all, I love like an acting performance that totally is just unafraid to go there and like I don't know how he kept that whole thing in his mouth, right? But he's just gonna get the comedic mileage out of it, right? It's like
The physical comedy to that is a lot. Especially, I mean, he has a whole plate full of them. It's not like this is something he might not get a bite of. He literally has an entire plate in front of himself. But he wants that one because it was going to go to Director G.
Right. If food on this show is a love language, love can make us both generous and kind and petty and jealous. And the way Chief Hong prepares food for many people and later tea for Haejin and can express how he cares about people through food, but also he is irrationally jealous of Director G. Even later on, when he is in a relationship with Haejin, this is like, I mean, and he's like, he is a 3-dimensional character. He is flawed. He is a wonderful person, but but he is petty as hell when it comes to the woman that he has feelings for, and that he's like stuck and doesn't know what to do with it. And he's going to grab food out of Director G's mouth. I don't know how many times. Like,
What's interesting though is that that is so like I feel like you can empathize with him in that, not necessarily from grabbing food out of people's mouths, but when you are in a room and it literally is just, 3 people and you have like a new friend, a new relationship or whatever, and there's somebody there that has something has a part of their past that you don't know about, it's really uncomfortable. Like, there is, like, a jealousy that I feel like that creeps up about that. Like, "Oh, I didn't know that about them," or, "Oh, like, I will never have that time with them. You have something that I can't." And there is, like, a weird
mhm,
jealousy that creeps up in that to me with, like, almost any relationship, you know? You have, like,
mhm.
a new bestie and you meet their, like, childhood friend, and you guys are just gonna have, like, a weird dynamic. Maybe I'm just childish.
Yeah. No, 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 no. And I think in particular, you know, what's going on internally with Chief Hong in this episode is he is beginning the episode with almost like these feelings of he's uncomfortable, right? He is uncomfortable with why does it annoy me the director G wants to ask Heijin out? Why does it annoy me that I can't let them go to dinner alone? I can't let her give him food. I am so happy when she sits next to me instead of him, right? To in the middle of the episode, all of a sudden he's going to be like, "Oh my god, I'm seeing her in slow motion. What the hell is wrong with me?" To
Mhm.
ending the episode literally holding his breath when she is close to him. And so it is, his journey on throughout this episode is grappling with discomfort to then moving closer to, okay, now my heart's racing,
Mhm.
right?
Well, he's acting I would say in this episode more than many of the other ones, he is acting completely out of emotion, and that is not a space that's comfortable for him because he's tried so much to disconnect himself from his emotions for years. And without even understanding
Mhm.
it, that is how he's reacting to everything.
In many ways, like whether it comes out in a petty way or whether it comes out in doing something really considerate and thoughtful, he can't stop thinking about her. And director G is threatening many things in his life. As much as he likes the guy, it is her time and attention, it is his role in the town, and he's insecure for a lot of this episode.
Well, whether he realized it or not, he was essentially treating his relationship or friendship or whatever with Heijin as if they had all the time in the world. And now they
Mm.
don't
Mhm.
because somebody has
Mhm.
stepped up and said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna take my shot." And he's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. That wasn't part of the plan," you know?
Yeah, and what's interesting is because of director G and because he provides this window into Heijin's past, everything he's learning about her makes him like her even more. So when they're talking about like how they met, Chief Hong is like, "You were busy? Why?" And that's when he learns, well, because I had to earn my tuition. I had several jobs and I had tutoring gigs. And this like piece of information begins to reframe everything that he thought he knew about her, right? Because when she arrived to town so many of their conversations it's about status and look at my expensive car and right like her clothes and the things that she orders and all of the things that on the surface made them seem so different, right? But what he's learning through director G is like actually they had very similar experiences starting out in university, right? So Chief Hong was on scholarship and had to work his tail off as an engineering major and get grades at a certain level in order to maintain that scholarship. Hei Jin is in a really hard major and is like working a ton of jobs, just like Chief Hong, to make ends meet and pay her tuition. And that reframes her materialism and her focus on status. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe there's this thing underneath that we actually have in common.
Right, because he finally realizes that she didn't come from status either.
Right. Yeah. Which is, all of the things that they seem to not have in common on the surface, and then the far deeper and important things that they do. Do you think Chief Hong spills the water on purpose?
Of course he does.
I
Of course he
really
does.
can't tell. You think he does on purpose? I
No,
really
I
can't
don't know.
tell.
This is very much to me like the battle of A League of Their Own. Like, did she drop the ball? That's what it feels like to me. I feel like there are cases to be made for both
Yeah.
instances.
Yeah, he's either distracted and because he's processing all of this information and he spills the water, or he's like, all right, stop reconnecting over the past. I'm going to interrupt this. So,
Maybe a little of both.
yeah, maybe a little of both. He is so insistent on that director G will not pay for his meal. Right. And she basically like stops the fight between them and is like, dude, just accept the way that he is. And that he wants like accounting down to the cents is just Chief Hong, right? He walks away. And in one of perhaps the most BS lines in all of Hometown Cha 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 is him being like, wow, he has really weird taste in women. I can't believe he would even think of her that way. Oh my God. So on the one front, Chi Pong is feeling threatened, whether he is willing to admit it or not, with director Ji making a play for Hei Jin. Now he's walking through town. He sees the grocery store owner. And I have to say that, like, as somebody who I have been pregnant 3 times, anytime a man wants to stop and help a woman lift something heavy who's pregnant, I just am like, that is a good guy. And I think it's so interesting, Beat, that director Ji and Chief Hong are both 2 men who are just bystanders, right? And they want to
Mhm.
help. And think about in the future episode when her husband is going to complain about moving all of those boxes or even stooping down to tie her shoelace before the typhoon.
Mm.
It's just
Yeah,
like,
he's failing right now.
oh my God. Yeah. And I mean that it's just there's a lot of really heartbreaking contrasts that they're slowly building in the background, these stories about love being chipped away at in a marriage because people are being taken for granted, because people are being inconsiderate. And you think about the fact that they got married because she got pregnant with Bo Ra in the first place. And it's really kind of like, ugh, it hurts my heart. But talk to me about his I am the chief of this town.
I mean, Director G is threatening everything in his life, right? It starts with Haitian, and that's already frustrating enough. But now he can't go to his jobs. He's not doing I feel like he's being left alone to his own devices too much. I it's just like he's being replaced because they make the comment,
Mm.
like, well, he did it for free. So wait a minute,
Yeah.
I thought we had like a good exchange going here. I already do it for minimum wage, but like people have to be paid something.
Hmm.
I feel like there's so much offense being taken, and he's just puffing out his chest like, wait, but this is my role. This is who I am.
Yeah. Well, everywhere he turns, right? So whether it's brunch or dinner with Heijin, or it's helping the grocery store owner with boxes, or it's fixing the software system at the hardware store, or it's bringing treats to Gamri and her friends. Everywhere he turns, Director G has already been there. And now, when we think back to what we will learn about how important being Chief Hong is to Hong Du-shik, it is what got him out of his house and gave him a new purpose. And now, everywhere he turns, somebody else is already doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it literally gave him something to do besides be depressed.
Yeah.
So if you take that from him, again, with if he's not serving, then what is he? And it's forcing him to confront not only his feelings for Heijin, but also his role in the
Mhm.
community.
Yeah. And, he says later on to director G flat out, right before they go chase the assailant, why are you up in everyone's business? That's my job, you know? Like he's just like,
He's kind of the other side of the coin to Namsook in a way because she's just up in it for the sake of being up in it. But don't think he's not fully aware of everything that goes on in that place. He just kind of serves in a way to make him belong in the places he's being, but he knows what's up.
yeah. I mean, he knows what everybody says about him. He is, yeah. But he, you know, both of them in different ways, Chief Hong's perhaps more constructive than Namsook's,
Oh, of
are
course, of course.
are lonely and alone at home. And so their community is everything. What people are doing, what people are worried about, what people need, who's kissing who. You know, Namsook is more concerned with some things than Chief Hong is. but both of them, all of it is outward because that is what keeps them from being alone and depressed at home. And
I don't know though. I think they might be concerned about who's kissing who at the same rate right now because it's certainly concerned that director G might get there.
there is a really great reference in here that I just want to touch on really quickly. And so when Chief Hong is like really annoyed at everything that director G is doing, he says, "What is he? Hong Gildong? I am the Hong in this town. I am the chief in this town." Went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with what Hong Gildong is, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is basically, according to an article from National Public Radio, when there was a big new translation of it into English here in the United States, basically the scholar described it as he is like the Robin Hood in South Korean literature. So he's like an illegitimate son who steals from the rich and corrupt aristocrats and kind of is like this bandit folk hero like Robin Hood or Ned Kelly in kind of Australian literature. And he is kind of like, the way that this scholar described it is he's kind of like Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby or Superman. And I thought that that was so interesting. And I would love if listeners know, because I was sort of limited in the research that I could do with respect to the original film that this show was adapted from. But this whole idea of the hero of Gongjin and the chief of this town and kind of like all of the escapades that they have shown kind of tongue in cheek of Dushik, you know, capturing various bandits and saving people's, you know, lives on train tracks. And in this episode, right, he's going to chase down a potential thief and tie him up with his shoelaces from his Converse. So it's kind of interesting. I was like curious, like, if that was in part the original film and this is part, you know, is in part a play on this kind of folk hero, which is absolutely about challenging class, right? Stealing from the rich to give to the poor. And Chief Hong is very much all about equality and not caring about class and kind of having these like escapades about town. That is the identity that he's assumed. So it's kind of like a fun little nugget in there. And we'd love to hear from listeners, you know, who obviously have a lot more sort of cultural background about this.
That is likely very familiar to some people. And I'd love to hear their thoughts on it.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you have read Hong Gildong and can share a little bit more with us and with other listeners about it, we would love to hear more about those parallels. All right, Beep, talk to me about Chief Hong absolutely starting to lose his stuff in the grocery store.
Of course, they run into each other again because they always run into each other. I guess finally Dushik is able to do one of his jobs. In his mind, I guess, has a different kind of swagger that day. And he's all about it. I think he's taken aback by how much he's like, oh, wait, this woman. I feel like he is a very much like, oh crap moment.
Like he's losing his shit, man.
Yeah, like, I'm really in this, aren't I? Oh God.
One of the things that if we think about this episode and where it kind of takes place and how this show overall tells this slow burn love story, and we're in a love triangle phase, right? We have Heijin and Chief Hong who are not articulating verbally that they are feeling the same thing at this point, right? However, they're on parallel tracks in this episode. Both of them are going to have these WTF, I am staring at somebody in scrubs taking off a neck brace and her hair is like in slow motion while this song that can make you feel like you're falling in love while making a peanut butter sandwich is playing, and everything's in slow motion, and he's like seeing her in slow-mo with like like human emoji heart eyes, right? Like I feel like Kim Seon-ho could win an award for just making us believe that he's literally falling in love with whatever's in front of him. And like Heijin is going to have a very similar moment when he is asleep, and she's going to be drawn in almost like a moon in orbit and almost kiss him, and then also be like, what is wrong with me? Right. So you have that reciprocation. You have reciprocation where they're both concerned about the other and can't stop thinking about whether one's walking in the rain or sick, or the other is that, oh, her neck hurts, and they're going to be doing things for each other. So overall, in sort of this slow burn story, Shin Ha-eun is telling us, yep, I'm not giving you what you want yet. And yes, there is this love triangle, and Director Ji is there. But I am showing you that they are on the same page emotionally, even though they are not telling each other yet. And I personally find that to be a very satisfying, slow burn, romantic storytelling, even with a love triangle. Because like you said, Beep, this isn't being played like, if you think back to the restaurant scene, this isn't being played like, oh, she doesn't really know what she wants. Do you know what I mean? Or it's like playing up the jealousy.
No, she's not choosing between them. That's not, yeah, she's
Right.
not choosing between them. It just like exists. There happen to be two men who are interested in her, but it's almost coincidental in many ways. It's just like this it's happening at the same time to
Mhm.
people who could have been, or one who used to be interested in and still is, and then another who's newer. It's not, it's all just kind of organic in that way.
Yes. Yes. And that it's organic in that their denial, whether it's her trying to be like, I got to put a stop to this, or him being like, that's not what this is. They're starting to have a hard time keeping those feelings locked up in a box by the end of this episode. And that's happening on parallel tracks. I think it's also interesting, sort of the easy way that they talk with one another and know like Heijin is almost anticipating a criticism that isn't coming from him anymore. She's like, yeah, I mean, I do work hard, and maybe you didn't think that, right? And he's like, well, why would you think that? And well, dude, because probably because a lot of the way that you've talked to her, like in the past, but there's the kind of this like organic thing happening where she's going to comment, she's going to start to say things like, I didn't think that he would listen to me. He does. He's noticing the things that she says, like the fact that her neck hurts. He's going to go home and he's not going to be able to stop thinking about it. And he's like, she leaves and he's like, what? Get a grip. Like he's trying to tell himself that, like, what is going on with me? And then he's home and he's like, God, why did I ask about why she's wearing the neck brace? Because now I can't help but think about it. And now he has to do something about it, which, he did before when he found her shoe, right? Like the guy spent hours restoring her shoe. He has always had this sort of, no matter what he's admitting, sort of this compulsive need to do things for her. But let's contrast hardware store owner husband and Dushik in this scene, particularly because it's a woman writer talking through another male character when a husband is like there kind of grousing and complaining about his wife and his kid.
He is failing so hard right now.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because I feel like this is one of those types of situations where nobody is particularly wrong, I think everyone goes through those types of frustrations, you know, be it as a in a marriage or as a parent or all those things, but I I mean, he just seems to have taken it too far as if, like, they're just some sort of burden on him, and like you had mentioned before, they originally got married, like, because of the first child, and I just think he's not really getting what it is that his wife is not only what she means, but what she's doing for him. I mean, when obviously she's the one having to go through all this stuff with her body to have a child, but, like, it's his child too, and to me, that's a sacrifice.
Mhm.
So, you should be there participating in it to whatever ever degree you can instead of complaining.
It's so everyday and ordinary in how inconsiderate he's being. He's not a terrible person. This isn't some, like, dramatic, he's an abusive husband, he's cheating on her, all this. No, this is just every day, all the choices you make because you're tired, because you're annoyed, because you're working long hours at a store, because you come home and your kids are a pain and don't have time for yourself. All of the ways that being married with small children can take a toll, and you choose to be selfish in reaction to that instead of, my wife is pregnant and is craving this fruit that we had on our honeymoon. He's hiding in Dushik's house because he's avoiding putting his kid to bed and complaining about getting the fruit. Meanwhile, Dushik is sitting there hand cutting this root to make a tea for somebody that didn't ask for it, who he's not in a relationship with, but because he's worried about her and he cares about her, although he has no expectation that they're going to have any relationship or anything more beyond what they're having. And so you have this contrast between somebody who is at a place where they should be doing things for other people out of love and they're not, versus somebody who is doing these acts of care for somebody when they don't have to. And that is sort of a thread that runs through this entire series between, people who are currently husbands or ex-spouses, or people who are like having feelings and are kind of like the men that they are. And it's not to say that, like, director Ji and Chief Hong are always going to get things right, right? People are going to make mistakes and have failings when you're tired, but there is a very distinct contrast between what a female writer is saying, this is how you take care of love, or this is how you chip away at it. And to me, I found it really, I really appreciated a woman writer. In many shows, this conversation would go very differently. It's two guys, it's a husband complaining about his wife and kids. And Dushik is like, no, dude, like, you're not right on this. And they're going to have another conversation later on where he's going to push back and be like, basically, like, why don't you want to get fruit for your pregnant wife? Like, right? Like, and he's going to, like, eventually come to it. And it's why they're not going to be able to find him when his wife is in labor, right? Because he's going to realize his mistake. But this is just something that is a steadily building frustration that is really, really hurts my heart when you think about the fact that she is like raising a daughter, pregnant, running a business, and it's going to all come to a head when she's basically like, can you help me tie my shoe? And he's like, why can't you do that yourself?
Oof. I do like that Dushik totally turns it back on him though, and does kind of what I was saying earlier as far as making it his responsibility too. Like, it's not her that's craving that, it's your child. Like, sorry.
Yeah. And, it's a thread that goes through to the end of the episode that really kind of is so beautiful. And yet the flip side of it is so heart wrenching in this ordinary way, because one of the acts of love in this episode that is going to make Chief Hong so happy is that Heijin remembers the fruit that he was craving and brings it to him, even though he didn't like ask for it or expect it. And she buys it from the grocery store owner. Meanwhile, her husband is complaining about doing the same thing for her. This episode is like all about the small things that we can do for each other, taking care of each other when we're sick, showing these acts of appreciation and thoughtfulness, which is how to express love. Noticing that somebody's not there when it's late at night and wondering if they're home okay. All of these small acts that in the end are like how we show people that we love each other, and larger is how a community functions as like a organism. But then you have these contrasts of young Gook and the hardware store owner that are failing or did fail in really heartbreakingly everyday ways, right? They're not terrible people. They just they're just taking the people that they loved for granted.
Mhm.
And that is hurtful and corrosive to their relationships. Beep, talk to me about rewatching this scene between Namsuk and Juri now that we know Namsuk lost a daughter Juri's age.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that earlier just as far as that constant reminder, and they're kind of 2 sides of a different coin, being that Namsook has lost her daughter and Juri has lost and never knew her mother. I I mean, I can't speak to that, as someone who's neither a parent nor has lost one, but I can look and just see the devastation that that must cause to be around a child like that so commonly, and we have to assume they all grew up together, everybody's been there. So this is probably, Juri is probably a child who was part of her daughter's life in some way, shape, or form, at least went to school together or something. So, I mean, the idea that she is concerned, about her being able to get a T-shirt for her favorite band or whatever, it's kind of an indirect way of providing for her daughter, which of course she never gets to do again. And I mean, I feel for her. I do. It is a stark contrast to her behavior, and I think that's what actually makes her a more complex character instead of just comedy fodder.
Yeah, and this if we think back to the beginning of episode 2, remember that montage with all the different characters holding different objects, which was Shin Ha-eun basically being like there's a lot of different mysteries and there's a lot of things that you don't know about these people. And that's sort of, a message of the show. So like think about that when you're out in your own lives and maybe somebody is impatient with you in kind of an everyday interaction, or somebody is gossiping and you're kind of like, oh, like, and you're annoyed, right? Or, I mean, I remember watching this show, sort of still height of the pandemic, and a parent totally lost it on the sidelines of like a soccer game. And I was like, which was not okay. Right. But also, I was thinking about like, man, what is really going on in that person's life? Because the way they just acted in this situation is not at all commensurate with what's going on, and something must be deeper going on under the surface in this person's life. And this story in particular in this show, and of course it's foreshadowing for Chief Hong's overall story that goes through the end, is asking us to think about those things in our everyday life, the things that people hold back, the things that we don't know about them, and to just like take a breath and be a little bit more compassionate. And also just like, this is another example of the kind of found family that this community can offer to each other. So just like Gamri had people sitting around a table last episode and took out more spoons than she ever had in her life, or just like this community shows up every year for Dushik's birthday when he doesn't have any living biological family left, this is Juri is like an adopted daughter for Namsuk, and Juri doesn't have a mother. And so she's going to be the one to say, be careful when you're walking. I don't want you walking home late at night. And if you need somebody to walk you home, you call me, right? It's like the people that can fill these holes in our lives even if we're not biologically related to them. However,
Until you pick a dentistry, and then we're gonna go off the rails.
well, but it also makes the point you can have empathy and you can be compassionate, but there's still lines that you need to draw.
100%.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. Haitian actually, to pick up on this point that we were talking about before, uses Chief Hong's language. I let it slide about the gossip. I
Mhm.
let it slide. But this is literally the illegal practice of dentistry. And you're putting my patients at risk. Notice it's not about the money.
No, it's dangerous.
Yeah. Right? Like I'm drilling holes in my patient's teeth and then they're not coming back to me and they're going to somebody who's not a dentist to get it fixed in their mouth. Like, this is not okay. And then Namsook calls her entire profession a fraud.
Oof.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Chief Hong is never going to not be nosy. And you've got an argument going on in the middle of the town. And in the past, he has taken, he's acting more behind the scenes, but this is so over the line that he is going to walk up and be like, no, 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 no. You crossed over the line and you do need to apologize. And Namsook is like really emotional about the fact that he's like taking her side. But, like, it's not okay what she's doing, and it's not excused why she's doing it, which the reason why she's trying to save money, right, is to honor her daughter's memory. But like, what she's encouraging people to do can like actively harm them. And that's what it's about.
Yeah,
For
that's
Haitian.
the issue. It wouldn't be as bad if it were just her, but she's getting other people to do it too, and actively putting them in danger. And that's, I mean, like he said when he strolled up, it's, you crossed it, buddy. That's too much.
Yeah. So we have, and I love Haitian and Mison and their like check-ins where they're basically like updating each other. And Beep, did you really enjoy Mison being like, you know what? We had like Yunchol and we had a rotisserie chicken moment.
You'll never get over that chicken. Here's a chicken. Like,
just an update. We had a rotisserie chicken moment. That's where my love life's at. What's going on with you? Like, here's all of the things. And Mison is like, I love that the two positions that these friends are in, because Mison may be like a dating professional and be quite experienced, but she actually has no idea how to date this guy that like doesn't know how to date.
Nope, not at all. Not at all.
And meanwhile, she has a friend that she's like, dude, you are so clueless. Like, why do you think Director G brought you brunch? And like, I think it's really interesting the journey Haitian's face goes on as she's talking about Director G. Because do you think she seems excited about it?
I don't think she was prepared for this.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, I really think she just thought, we have a past, we are friends, we're catching up. And so this is casting it in a light that she really had not been considering.
Right. She's contemplative, right? Whereas what I think is interesting is Mison says, fate made you cross paths again. And it's like, yeah, well, same for Chief Hong.
Yeah.
Right. So
guess who actually met her first if we're going down this road.
Oh my God, you're right. You're right. But contrast the contemplative reaction to Mison asking, is Chief Hong a good kisser? I'm just curious because he's good at so many things. I would just like to know if he is in that department as well. And Haitian is like, her cheeks are all flushed and she's like, like, stop talking about it. And it's like, man, the show is just so straightforward in showing us her reactions to these two options, right?
Yeah. Well, because if it was what you said it would just be like girl talk,
Right.
If it really didn't matter. But honey, it clearly does.
Well, both of them, right? Like later on, he's going to get all flat, right? Again, it's just like parallel emotional tracks. So here's the thing. We have this love triangle, but even our romantic rival is is preoccupied with the safety and well-being of the person that he has a crush on. He runs across town and gives her all of these gifts. Talk to me about this scene because it's actually really sweet, all of the things that he gives her.
It is, but I have to say, watching again and seeing the llama really upsets me because
Why?
he, throughout, his productions or whatever, wouldn't give it to anybody and had to have it to their productions. And then it seems like, especially from, the writer's point of view, once she finds out, like, oh,
Mhm.
this is now nothing to you. Like we just handed, I don't know. It made me
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah. Well, I I think there's a lot of interesting things to unpack with this. So, the llama, right, is this like talisman of good luck. But his real quote unquote like good luck charm is the writer, right?
Hmm.
That is his partner who they have had so much success and have all of these like it's work but just wonderful memories and adventures like all over the world together, right? And director G is taking a wrong turn here, right?
Hmm.
He's chasing after his first love, but the one that he's actually going to like lose his appetite over and be really, really, really upset over losing, and Chi Peng's going to kind of notice it before he even does, is the writer.
Right.
And so when he gives this away, that's when their luck starts to also take a wrong turn until he
Right.
gets
He's
his wife.
focusing in all the wrong places now. He's,
Yeah.
and his work will suffer for it. Not that you shouldn't, work should come first. That's not what I mean. But he's just, like you said, he took a wrong turn. So now he's walking down a wrong path and he can't juggle everything he needs to juggle because his focus is in the wrong direction.
What I think is interesting is his heart's in the right place. He wants to give her things that she can like protect herself with, right? But later on in the evening, he's going to be wrapped up in understandably filming his show. It's Chief Hong who's going to be the one who notices that she's not there and does something about it.
Hmm.
So, it's not to say that it's not considerate and he's not thoughtful and that even the love interest that's going to lose out is still a thoughtful and considerate person, right? Who is worried about somebody and trying to offer things to like take care of somebody. We shift to the two guys that Misun and Heijun were just talking about on Lollipop Patrol together. Very much Chief Hong trying to reassert, I am the chief of this town. I'm going to walk around and protect it with the cop. The cop is like, what are you like? He's like, yeah, we're patrolling. Don't you know that's part of my job? And he's like, it is. And he will be the one to ultimately catch this guy, right? 2 episodes from now. Talk to me about the scene where he brings her the tea in the rain and sees Heijin and director Ji under the umbrella that he gave back to her.
Oh man. I mean, it would just be a normal scene where they're not so much the symbolism involved with not only an umbrella, but that particular one and kind of how it's come between some fights that they had, but also when they just tossed it that day, and we're living a different kind of life for 5 minutes. So, oof, but after the fight and her not wanting to be connected and everyone denying the kiss and just it meant nothing, that's how the umbrella came back into her possession. And that's just so it's the symbol, right? Of like not us in a way. And it's just ugh, it's hard. So of course he as always diminishes whatever effort he put into something. Like, oh, it's just,
Mm,
I just kind of had this or whatever. Here you go.
yeah. Doesn't even say what it's for, right? He doesn't, I just had it lying around. No, he was like sitting there hand cutting it for what seems like hours, right?
I'm sure.
Yeah, and he's just like, here's this stuff. He doesn't even say, of course, Heijin is always going to Google everything he ever says later on. But it is a very quick scene, but he is kind of wrecked seeing her with G. And what I love about it is I can think of many other shows where the tone of this scene would have really amped up the angst in like a manipulative way,
Oh, so much conflict.
right? Except everybody's worried about everybody. Hey, Shin is like, no, no, no. Like, what are you doing walking without it? Come inside. Let me give you an umbrella. Director, she's like, let me walk you home with the umbrella. Everyone, there's no unnatural jealousy or drama. It just is what it is.
Yeah, there's no animosity between them.
Yeah. And he is very bad at letting people look out for him. And he like doesn't accept that and walks home alone in the rain, comes home and is sick and this dark house alone.
That's one thing in TV that always drives me crazy because, you know, your mom is always like, don't go out in the rain, you'll get sick. And it's like, but really?
I find it so ironic that Heijin was the one worried about taking risks on the beach and was like, but if I run in the rain, I'll get a cold.
Right, of course.
And Chief Hong is the one who gets sick after being alone in the rain without an umbrella. Like, so Heijin comes home. Again, there's this contrast between people who are being considerate and thinking about others and people that are not. And there is a softness and thoughtfulness to her that she is kind of softened ever since she's kind of collected this information that he wasn't interested in somebody else. He asked her, don't go. She's like sitting in her house. She like looks at the llama thing, puts it away, and then her thoughts are consumed about Chief Hong. And she's worried about whether he got home okay. She automatically opens up the bag of the things that he gave her. She looks it up. She tries to figure out what's it for. What should I do with it?
I really wanted her to just try to eat one. And then be like, "Bleh," and have to go look up what to do.
Again, when you think about the beautiful parallels, the tea is something that he made for her because it will be good for her out of care. It tastes terrible. And she drinks it anyway. And obviously, this is going to be bookended with the porridge at the end of the episode. But it's just this very simple and subtle way of Shin Ha-eun exploring everyday ways that people both express love and accept love. And there are these like small acts, and yet in this story, they're kind of monumental signposts along our journey. And she immediately calls him to thank him. Heijin has always been sort of the person who's acted first, but we're starting to see this shift where she is going to, from now on, be the one who, quote unquote, crosses the line.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to stop here and shift and talk about the other love triangle that is going on in this episode.
It's amazing how much more contentious this one is when there's not really a triangle at all. Or at least not the one you think.
Yeah. And particularly now that we know everything that is going on under the surface, right? And I think it's interesting the way it echoes our main like lead character love triangle, and that there are deeper pains and kind of wounds and things going on under the surface that we didn't realize on first watch. And again, we have a contrast between like words and actions. There are some pretty harsh words that are said during this episode. And yet, when push comes to shove, people are looking out for one another and taking care of each other. So first we have this scene between Ha Jung and Young Duk. And he is like, look, I want to let you know, as my ex-wife, I'm going to be pursuing Cho Hee. And Ha Jung says, she's off limits. Anyone but her.
Mm. And the way that, I mean, we get it now, but it seemed like at the time, I can see how that looks to him as like, okay, but there isn't anybody else. So are you just saying that because you really don't want me with anybody? And this is so hard. On the other hand, I'm like, dude, how... I don't know, I feel like he just doesn't get this because he's like, "Oh, I settled, because she moved away." And it's like, "But you weren't even together, and there was no indication you were going to get married." Like, I feel like part of him just lives in this weird fantasy world.
Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha can be such a achingly romantic show, but it also has a lot of kind of raw, quiet moments that are pretty clear-eyed about how life can be disappointing. And you have this marriage that ended. She speaks very harshly to him. It's obviously coming from a place of like deep hurt, but it's not like constructive, right?
No, not at all.
So now we know that what she overheard is him telling Oh Yoon, wasted one night, my first love moved away. So basically, I just kind of felt like I was getting old and I needed to get married, and I settled. And
Mm.
marriage is boring.
Could you I mean, I don't think there's anything worse that you could hear
It like makes me want to cry.
as a spouse, assuming there's, like, no infidelity and nothing, just not even that. It's just like,
No.
I just don't care about her. And saying, him saying, "I married because you wanted to, I
Mm.
divorced as you wanted to, what did I ever do?" Well, that's a great question, buddy, because you don't seem to be taking responsibility for any like, decision you've ever made.
Well, everything about the way he said, think everything about this conversation presses every button about that old hurt. Who he wants to date is the one that he said left, and therefore I settled for you.
Right.
Then he acts like both marriage and divorce were not like even within his own agency. He just basically did both because she wanted both,
Yeah.
which just
And
underlines the old hurt that he settled and felt sorry for her because her mother died and that's why he married her. So everything about this conversation is just rubbing salt in that old wound. And then he asks the question, what did I ever do? Which is just, right? Like Shin Ha-eun basically being like, put a pin in that because that's the mystery, right? But that's what is going on. That is the underlying tension in this scene that we didn't realize on first watch. Which then leads us to the really, like, it's really painful. I find this such a hard scene to watch. Cho-hee is trying to act like a friend. There was no relationship with her and Jungkook. It was like this one-sided like fantasy in his head, right? She
Mhm.
had feelings for Hajang. She's trying to get back to this like status quo because she feels like she can't open up about her feelings for Hajang. She's obviously like drawn to her, right? Hajang is her first love. She's
Right.
back in this town with the two of them, and she brings her a gift. What a girlfriend would bring to another girlfriend. It's like, no, I found this, anti-wrinkle cream and I brought it to you, which again, unfortunately, presses
Mhm.
buttons for Hajang, who feels like she looks old and is feeling frumpy and is kind of like middle-aged, like mom. And here is this, my ex-husband's first love was back in town, and everybody's always talking about how beautiful and how young she looks. And what she gives me is like wrinkle cream.
Yeah. "Do you think I have too many wrinkles?" It's like, "Oh, honey."
Ugh.
I feel so bad for both of them because it wasn't the intention at all. Like, both of them are well, Cho-hee's trying to get something out of the interaction that, Hajang is unwilling to give, but I feel like it started off that way already,
Yeah.
so this only compounds it. And I never think Cho-hee is trying to do more than just, actually be her friend, but there's so much underneath it that she doesn't know about what Hajang is feeling that I think in a lot of ways she probably reads as being about her.
Like a rejection of her.
As if she's also uncomfortable the way that Shohei's
Mm.
family was uncomfortable, when really it's just about the dynamic with Jungkook.
Well, I can't imagine how complicated you must feel if you're Hajang, how complicated your feelings would be because your husband, you feel like you're like the deepest wound in your marriage that ended your marriage was your husband talking about how this is the woman that was his first love, and when she moved away, then he settled for you. Yet,
Hmm.
Ha-jung is aware that that was a completely futile crush because
Hmm.
Cho-hee had feelings for Ha-jung that Ha-jung can't return in that
Right.
way.
Right.
It's a complete cluster.
It is because nothing that anybody thinks. I mean, I guess Hajung is the one who has the most information, but outside that, everything everyone else is thinking is more inward, and they really don't have a clue where anyone else stands.
Yeah, and Cho-hee almost parallel to, it's not quite apples to apples, but almost parallel to Chief Hong being like, "Why can't we just be friends?" in the last couple episodes. She's like,
Right.
"Why can't the 3 of us just be friends?" And Ha Jung is like, "Dude, I'm divorced from him."
Mhm.
And what Cho-hee doesn't know is that she is, it by no fault of her own, central to the reason why they got divorced. And Ha-jung says, "My life isn't going well enough to put up with your childish requests."
That's such a burn because Cho-hee has actually been acting so delicately by
Mhm.
saying, and even trying to bring him into it, "Can't we all just be friends?" When I don't think she really cares about being friends with Jungkook to start with, especially the way he is now, like, obviously trying to pursue her. I mean, so it's hard because she's already hiding behind the mask of, like, how things used to be because she's not, doesn't want to reveal those feelings that she assumes Hajung is not aware of. A
Mhm.
and so she's just getting beat down from every angle. I really feel for her as well.
I know. And she's just trying to reach out to her on safe territory, which is
Mhm.
friends. And I think also, I mean, I think she is trying to communicate, "I'm not interested in your ex-husband." The problem is the ex-husband has just basically put a flag in the ground to be like, I'm going after her." And
Yeah.
she has no idea coming into this conversation, and now we have this bookend conversation. They're going to be sitting in the same place at the end of this series, and they're going to have this like beautiful conversation where Ha Jung is going to be like, "I always knew, and I never judged you for it, and I care about you." But right now, because of her hurt having to do with her ex-husband, she is quite harsh in pushing Cho-hee away. So those are the words. Cho-hee is like obviously torn up about it and is like drinking alone to the point where she is like in a pretty unsafe place getting home. And it really is like painful to watch. But in contrast to her words, Ha Jung is looking out for Cho-hee, notices that she is drinking alone and is not in a great state. I find it really powerful the way a woman looks out for the safety of another woman. And man, Ha Jung has balls chasing that guy off and
Mhm.
like yelling at him and like making sure that her friend is okay and basically saves her from sexual assault and then is there by her bedside waiting for her to wake up at the hospital. And it is a contrast of like, if we've talked about throughout, your words don't match your actions. She obviously cares a lot about Cho-hee, and despite these really complicated feelings, is looking out for her and takes care of her in every possible way, right? She saves her the way Chief Hong saves Heijin at the end of this episode. I think it's really empowering that a woman does it. And I think it's really, when you think about, Cho-hee was like asking if we can be friends, and Ha-jung's like, "We can't be friends." Yet there's this moment that when the chips are down and somebody's safety was actually threatened, those 3 old friends are all in the room worried about her. But then you have like Ha-jung taking this lonely walk down the hallway, listening to her ex-husband fawn over the woman who he's basically was like always the one that got away.
What's interesting about that, though, in general, is kind of the extra care that she takes because she absolutely did not have to stay at her bedside. Like, that to me was the part that was beyond. if you will. She didn't
Mhm.
have to be there at all. You get her, she, you help her. She doesn't even know what's going on. Good deed done. But the fact that she stays there, I feel like is really poignant to show what this person meant to her personally and what she still does.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's, she spoke really harshly to her, but the deeds, like those acts of care are what matters. Yeah, it's really whew, it's brutal on rewatch. Like, particularly for the 2 women, because Jungkook is gonna be pretty clueless for a while until he
Ugh.
figures it all out? And then you think Cho-hee is the one that's going to really kind of bring them back together because she's gonna be like, "Don't screw this up again," you know?
He's so
Um,
daft for so much of the series.
all right, so that takes us to if we had a hero of Gongjin, we've got a trio of heroes of Gongjin, and you've got Namsuk basically caught in a phishing scam. And it kind of breaks my heart when she tells the guy who is the would-be thief, I need this for something important. Please
Mhm.
don't lose it. She's doing all of this to raise money in her daughter's memory. Heijin, even though there is literally no one in town that she is more annoyed at than Namsuk, steps up and is peak nosy. She literally notices her walking with the money, follows her, and interjects herself into the middle of this transaction and is the reason. Like, obviously, they get help from director Ji and Chief Hong, but Heijin is the reason why this theft doesn't proceed without a hitch.
Right. And it's not even that she's just frustrated at her. They're not friends.
She's crossing a line and being nosy, and Heijin has done that for many people now in this town. But she's even willing to do it for somebody who has been talking trash about her reputation, undermining her business, and putting her patients at risk. Their last conversation was like a huge argument, and she's still not going to let Namsuk get taken advantage of.
Right, right.
There was zero chance that Chief Hong wasn't going to be the one to chase down this guy, even though he has 102 fever.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't matter. You could see his head literally boiling, and he would still be running after this guy.
And I love, like everybody, the reason why he's able to catch him is because he is the chief of this town and knows the alleys to cut him off. But he is so, so petty. And basically be like, yeah, I got him, Director G. You be the one to go like pick up all the money. And he says, basically, the guy's like, do you even know why you were chasing me? And he's like, no, Miss Dentist told me to.
Like, that's enough, obviously.
Well, yeah, just like there's going to be a lot of she's like, I didn't think that he listened to me, but you tell him to go chase this guy, he will. You tell him to take a nap, he will. You tell him to eat the porridge, he will. When they all get back into town and Namsuk is like distraught, and now we understand when she's saying my Aram, she's talking about her daughter, and that is why she is so upset about this money potentially being stolen. Director Ji does not take undue credit. And the guy who was sort of threatening Chief Hong's status in town is very clear. Nope, he's the one who saved him, and he's not willing to take.
I loved that.
He's such a good guy. When the cop is blaming Namsuk for being gullible, Heijin says, why are you blaming the victim?
I hate that that's so relevant.
Oh,
It's so relevant, and
yeah.
I feel like any sort of crime against a woman, it doesn't even matter if it, like, has to do with the fact she's a woman, like, it just very, very normal, unfortunately.
Yeah. And Shin Ha-eun says a lot of very important feminist statements through Heijin, and this one's a really important one about women being blamed when things that shouldn't happen to them. That takes us to Chief Hong is finally like feels so terrible. He's finally going to head home. Even though Director Ji is like complimenting Heijin, her eyes are on him. And just like he couldn't get out of his head that she had that herniated disc and needed to do something about it, she shows up at the doorkeeper's door, unwilling to take no for an answer, to take care of him.
I love how she just kind of slinks past him.
Well, I
She
love
just goes between him and the door, like, whoop, here I go.
yeah, there's so many things, right? Like he is, being a literal doorkeeper, right? And we have talked about how this house is symbolic of his heart and his like inner life. And he's like standing at the door and is like, go home. And he told her to cross lines and she's not going to take no for an answer. And just like, it's basically like the thermometer never lies. So when she wanted to stay in her house and not go out into the community and pretended to be sick, he took the thermometer out and called her bluff. And now he's pretending to be better than he is. And she takes the thermometer out and calls his bluff. And he has 102 fever. And she's basically like, I'm coming in. Talk to me about how terrible he is at accepting her help.
I mean, it's just now he's being an outwardly petulant child. He's not even trying to keep it in anymore. The same guy who's like, don't go, just will not stop telling her to go home. But he's not, I know he's used to taking care of himself, but he's not.
No.
And that's a problem. He's not eating, he's not drinking, he's not doing any of the stuff that will actually help you get better, when you're going through that. And 102 that's a bad fever.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of like blowing it off and not taking care of himself.
No, and he has like a wound on his arm that he didn't clean. Like, this is small stakes, right? He has a virus. He has a wound on his arm. He's really, really bad and really reticent at accepting now, hey, Shin is the one crossing the line, right? And she is just so patient with him. And every time he pushes her away, you're not a real doctor. Just go home. I'm fine. You clean the wound. Now go. She just stays. And gently is like, but did you eat anything? But let me do, right? And it is absolutely previewing the whole back half of this story where she's going to have to be very patient with how bad he is at opening up and letting somebody do this for him. Like, this scene is like, he literally doesn't know how to let somebody take care of him. And she keeps saying things like, just let me. And finally, it's sad when you're sick alone. Everyone knows that. Why don't you?
They're both so tragic in their aloneness.
I know.
I feel like what did set her up, no, I mean, she's doing it because she cares and she has all the patience, but I feel like what did set her up for this is being a dentist and the fact that most people don't want to see her. So she's just like, I don't care if you want me here or not. This is how this is going to go down.
Yeah, but I mean, I think what's so they have this really important thing in common about losing people and being lonely. But the difference between Hae-jin and Du-shik is Hae-jin grew up watching her father take care of her mother when she was sick. Like, right on the beach in that childhood memory, we saw her father tucking the blanket around her mother's legs on the beach. When Chief Hong tells her father in the next episode, no, I can tell that she received a lot of love because she gives a lot of love. Right? So she, even though she can be awkward and like off-putting, this is the side of Hae-jin that I just absolutely love. When do you think is the last time Chief Hong had anybody take care of a wound for him?
Like, I mean, I would guess never since his grandfather died.
Yeah. And he has this like, it's this great parallel moment because they're sitting in the same place where she kissed him. And his empathy and his trying to comfort her, right, with his hands made her feel all of these things, right? Now they're sitting in the same place. She blows on the wound on his arm, and he is like mesmerized, right? He probably is like stopped breathing, right? Because they show that at the end of the episode as well, right? And he is just like, you've got all of these feelings, and yet he is keeps pushing her away. Like, he's just so bad at being taken care of. Like,
Hey, some people are bad patients to begin with, so I imagine he's
yeah,
probably already like that, and then throw on top of it the fact that he's emotionally incapable of it. I mean, this is what you get.
right. And there's a lot of, I mean, this is a really poignant scene, especially now that we know everything he's been through and how alone he's been, that this is really the first time he's let somebody come in his house and take care of him. And it's like watching, there's a lot of both this scene and the end of this episode with the hug. It's like watching somebody trying to use muscles that they haven't used in a long time and have like atrophied because he's been on this island alone. And there's a lot of humor about, she's like, okay, I'm going to be in your kitchen. And like, if you hear things crash or you hear me scream, like, just stay here and like rest. And there's like a lot of humor in it, but it's really, really thoughtful and sweet what she does. And she's a terrible cook. She has no idea how to make porridge. We literally have never seen her cook this entire series. She used to be in Seoul ordering takeout every night. And she's not going to let him not eat. And she makes this porridge and like leaves it for him with this note. And then she thinks about what Misun said. And just like he was like staring at her at the grocery store, she's now staring at him asleep. It's, one of the classic romantic tropes, right? Watching somebody sleep. And it's like she's pulled in almost by like a tractor beam. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She's she's barely even walking. She's just kind of floating over there. Unbeknownst. It's not even a choice that she's making.
Talk to me about the fact that now we know that he wasn't actually asleep.
I mean, doesn't that make it a million times better? It's just I must say, I'm really, really glad that she didn't kiss him.
Yep. Because I don't like that trope where somebody
No.
kisses somebody without consent. Yeah, they stop
Right, it's
short.
awkward,
Yeah.
like, it's awkward. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be one thing if they were, like, in a relationship, but especially where they are right now, like, no, that would I would not have liked that.
Yeah.
I actually thought she might kiss him on the forehead, which actually would have been friggin' adorable.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I
She's
mean, I almost don't know how she didn't realize he was awake because he had to be so tense that he could, like I mean, I just imagine he was, like, shaking, and so she just must not have been paying attention because this man would have been, like, out of his mind with nervousness.
I mean, let's just unpack this from both sides. So she's sober now. The last time she acted on these kinds of feelings is when her inhibitions were down, right? Then we have all of this baggage about him denying it and saying it was a mistake and all of that. Despite all of that, she's feeling so much now that it's this still moment and there's no noise and it's just the two of them and she's taking care of him, that she's about to kiss him again. He is literally holding his breath. It is this perfect symbolism for like where he is at emotionally on this journey about his feelings for her, because he's not going to stop it, but he's also not going to act on it and make it happen. He's literally just lying there, probably with his heart pounding, holding his breath, frozen.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think after the the treatment he received last time, though, I mean, again, it was all a situation where a all of the feelings on both sides are valid, they're just not expressed very well, but I just feel like there was no way he was gonna be the one to make the move of any kind, which is why it matters so much that she's the one that comes and tells him, that she likes him.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that is so heartbreaking, there's so many layers to this, and I love the epilogue storytelling because it always lets us in on what he was feeling, even if that is not. I mean, the story is opening up a lot more now and letting us into Dushik's head, but the epilogue still functions as it often does, and it lets us know what he was feeling in this moment with Heijun, which is they're feeling the same thing. They're feeling the same pull. Their hearts are both pounding. They're both holding their breath about to connect, and then they don't. But what is holding him back is he's thinking if she knew everything about me, she wouldn't want to be with me because I'm not worthy of her.
Right. She wants a if she wants me, she wants a false version.
Right. So she walks out absolutely freaking out, similar to Dushik after the grocery store. Dude, what is my problem? Like she's talking to herself the same way. She's hitting herself, and the grocery store owner stops her. Ugh, and the pregnant wife whose husband is being so obtuse right now that he won't bring her the fruit that she's craving. Heijin sees the tangerines and leaves them for Dushik.
Yeah.
And
She doesn't make a thing out of it. She doesn't go in. She doesn't try to do it for, attention or praise or thanks. They're just there. And that's really sweet.
Dushik wakes up. He is so pleased that this tray with porridge is sitting there waiting for him. He looks like a kid, like with a Christmas present to open. But then talk to me about the fact that it tastes terrible.
Oh my goodness. Okay, here's the thing, and this is just a personal thing. I can drink anything. Okay. It might be absolutely disgusting. So long as it's like bordering on actual liquid, I can stomach that. I can, whatever. So like with Heijin did with the tea, and she's like, okay, this is gross, but she drinks it anyway. Bad porridge or like what I would consider, some sort of like oatmeal or something. Oh my God. To literally have to choke that down, like I kind of want to gag just thinking about it.
Well, it's also this thing that Hometown Cha 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 does so well is that you have this really poignant and sweet, earnest, like she did something really thoughtful for him. But the comedic, it tastes terrible. So he's like sitting here actually laughing at how could she have messed up? Like, why does it taste sour? It's literally boiling rice with water. Like, how did you screw this up?
I feel like it had to be so bad that it was literally unsalvageable because it's not even like he didn't even go try to put any spice or like salt or like anything in it. He was just like, well, I guess I'm in it now. Like, and the fact that he's like, I could not possibly finish this, but when he stands at the sink, he still does. It's just like, oh my goodness, dude. And if she left my kitchen like that, I would lose my shit. Okay.
I mean, she wants me to drink. She wants me to eat every last drop. Like, where is her conscience? Because this tastes terrible. But just like she's going to drink the bitter tea because he made it for her to get better, he is going to sit there and eat this porridge that tastes terrible and do what she said on this Post-it note because she did it for him. But then he walks into his kitchen and it's a freaking disaster. And he's sick. So now he has to clean up his kitchen, even though he's like running a fever. And it's basically like, oh my God, all of your help is like actually not helpful at all, which is just, I love it. There's so many ways that they always puncture their earnest emotion with humor. And this is one of these, you're like, oh my God, this is so sweet. But then also his kitchen's a disaster because of her.
Well, it's so symbolic because she's busted into this
Oh,
false minimalistic, environment that he has cultivated, which of course, as we mentioned, has, in some ways represents his emotions and his heart and stuff. And she's wrecked it like a tornado, just like she's done to him.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. He cannot bear to pour it down the drain. We have gotten a lot of shots of Chief Hong alone in his house and in his cabin. And a lot of them have been quite like mournful and lonely shots. This one is he's like standing in the kitchen with the light through the window, and the music is kind of setting this a little bit more upbeat tone. And he's going to finish every last drop of this porridge that tastes terrible, even though no one's watching. She will never know whether he ate all of it or not, but he has to eat every drop. And it's just this like, I don't know, it's just a really great moment to be like, you know what? Even at these little acts, he's starting to have somebody who takes care of him. And she's not there in that house with him yet, but he's alone in his kitchen, but now he's eating something that like somebody else made for him. He wakes up the next morning, feels so much better, walks outside and finds the bag of tangerines.
There are no feelings involved in this for anyone. No feelings. I feel like it's the first time he's been genuinely delighted to see something from her without fighting it.
Yeah. He's so happy. If we want to get like deep in our feels, think about the douche that got off that bus in this very place and what he looked like. And he was like a shell of himself. This is a person who has put himself back together by living for others. And now he's sitting outside on a beautiful day, eating a tangerine that somebody left for him because she cares about him. And he says that it tastes sweet.
Just like her helping him.
It's a lot. And it's a lot in such a simple way. Like this is a romanticist with a big R scene. He's out in nature. It's an act of love from someone in his community. He is tasting something from nature, like on his tongue that tastes sweet while he's looking out at the ocean in the sunshine. And for that moment, he is happy. And it's really beautiful in all of its simplicity.
Yeah, he just allows himself to be.
Mm-hmm.
And is not thinking too much about what that means.
Yeah. And, it is an example of if episode 15 of this show in flashback shows all of the small ways with words and actions that we can really hurt each other with his best friend's widow and the security guard's wife. This episode shows all of the small ways that we can be like transformational for each other's lives just by being like caring and thoughtful. And that takes us to Ha Jung kind of pulling He Jin aside. And I think it's really interesting that Ha Jung, she's going to do this again. She's going to intercede again much later in the show when Chief Hong and He Jin are sort of at an impasse and have that argument about him not opening up. She is the opposite of Nam-suk. She is not somebody who gossips. She's always commenting on Nam-suk gossiping, and she often tries to shut down Nam-suk's gossip. But when she knows something about somebody and can offer that insight to bring people together, she's going to do it.
Right, because what she explains to Heijin is not gossip or not. No, I will say it's not gossip because it wasn't shared to inflame. It's not a secret per se. She is doing it to show compassion to Namsook and also to share that compassion with Heijin in hopes that it might make a difference in how she sees her, because Namsook she's just not that shallow, not that flat. There have been things in her life that have affected her as a person, and the moment when Ha-jung says, "I'd rather see her like this than like she was, just, walking around as a shell of herself," that really, really lands as far as understanding in a community what you might tolerate from somebody when you know not only the background, but the alternative.
Yeah. And because you know one another, right? As opposed to, if you were to think about all the kinds of interactions that you would have in a city when you don't know people and you don't know what's going on in their lives, and then you like react because you don't know them, right? So this is like understanding and empathy that comes from truly knowing one another. And Ha-jung is such an interesting character because I feel like she has this, which she'll express later on, kind of wisdom from what can happen if you don't say something. And so she hasn't, she wasn't able to kind of put that into practice in her own life. Her marriage fell apart. She was yelling at her husband about socks being on the floor instead of what was really bothering her. And what she has now is kind of this wisdom and empathy of like, she is the one that is often giving voice to this idea of like, you don't know what's going on with people under the surface. What is easy for some may be hard for others, right? Like making allowances for people. And this flashback of Namsook with her daughter is so painful. And it's like, ugh, now we know why she sits in that room and holds that Sailor Moon wand. And it's about a community like offering grace and compassion and kind of like putting up with the annoying things about somebody because you would rather them be okay and see that like gossip and stuff and all of that because she's lonely and like be patient and put up with it. And from now on, Namsook is actually like, she's going to, you have this scene with her and Heijin offers the olive branch. And, in a way, it's almost like she's in the opposite position of where she was with Oh Yoon at the beginning of the story. And now she's the one who's offering the olive branch and is basically like, okay, you did something wrong. Please don't do it again. But you come to my dentist's office. I want to make sure that your inlay is okay. And she's the one who takes that step. And, Namsook is going to remember this. And when she gets the juiciest piece of gossip ever that they're dating, she's not going to say a word. It's going to like keep it a secret. So it's really this like, all of this is so like everyday conflict, right? And yet Shin Ha-eun just layers in this deeper meaning and wisdom about empathy and compassion and forgiveness. It's really beautiful. Finally, this show is in full swing and they're filming at Gamri's house. I love the like meta moment where the member of DOS keeps flipping his hair back and director she's like, can you please refrain from doing that? And then you've got Chief Hong in the background. Oh, because he always is flipping his hair, being like, well, what's wrong with that? Always. And listen, don't stop. Never stop doing that.
Of course not. I love that he's aware of it, though. Because some people, that's just emotion that they do or whatever. He's like, wait, what's wrong with that? Because he knows that he does it constantly.
So everybody's there. The only person who notices that it's like after 10 o'clock at night and dark and Haejin is not there, is Chief Hong. And we have this really, like, in a very real, everyday way for women, scary moment for Haejin, where she is alone and it's dark and she's on her way home and she's being followed. And I mean, it's interesting how Hometown Cha-Cha-Cha weaves in these kind of everyday threats to women throughout a story that is, at least at the outset, a romantic comedy, but it's always there. Whether it was the sexual harasser or this predator who has been stealing women's clothes, tried to kidnap Cho-hee. Now he's after Haejin, and this is not over. He's going to come back and actually like force his way into her home. She turns the corner. There's the light, and there's Chief Hong.
Who is one and the same.
Yeah.
And this is when we get, I think we've talked about this before, but this is when we get him coming to a little bit. Okay, he accepts the hug, but she gets one arm.
One arm. Yep.
One arm.
One arm. He is, right. He is what you said. He is always bringing light, right, into her life, whether it was a candle or the lights came back on, or in the next episode, it's going to be fixing the street lamp because he's going to, remember that it was the reason why this alley was dark is because that street lamp's not on. He's always there bringing light into her life. And what is interesting is that she acts on instinct now because she was so scared, and she is so relieved to have found safety with him. So like before she was acting on instinct because of alcohol, now she's acting on instinct because it's like this adrenaline rush, right? And she just was so scared that she like literally runs into his arms, and then she doesn't let go.
And doesn't even consider it. She's not in her intellect right now.
Yeah, she's not in her head. She pulls him closer. And he's like, it's so interesting now, like as we like think about his journey, because he's like shocked by it and like frozen. But then he like, as you said, he like gives into it a little bit, and like one arm, right? We're now, the laundry scene, she didn't get an arm. Now she's got one. By the end of episode 11, she's finally going to get like a full arm hug. But now that we have like watched the whole series, and that we see that Dushik and of course Haejin are actually both quite loving people, both in acts, but also like physically affectionate. Like they're both really warm, loving people. And it's like watching them both awaken. And this is a big step along that journey. As we talked about, both this scene at the end of the episode and Haejin coming into Dushik's home and caring for him for the first time, and kind of awakening that, wow, I like this. And if think back to the episode where she was at his house that night and she asked him, aren't you ever lonely in this house? And he was like, no, I have my town. Like, no, I don't think about that. It's almost like he didn't know how lonely he was when she asks him, why don't you know how sad it is to be sick and alone? It's like he doesn't know the difference. So we went to the script book, and we thought this would be a great point where we're now at the halfway point in this series to check in with future Dushik, what he now has grown accustomed to and loves having in his life, and talking about past Dushik, who we are with right now at the end of episode 8. So in the script book, Shin Ha-eun wrote 2 letters. One from Haejin to Dushik that takes place after the confession at the end of episode 10. And then a letter that Dushik writes to Haejin that takes place after the series has ended at some point in the future where they are married.
Ooh.
I know.
We owe so much to this Twitter user at lovely Shinmin Ah, who just goes about translating everything for us from Korean in the script
Yeah.
book. It's so we owe them so much.
It's such a gift. I mean, it's like a two-layer gift. It's a gift from Shin Ha-eun to the fans of this show to have written letters back and forth between these characters that she so lovingly crafted. Like, what a gift. I don't know. This is not typical, at least in my experience, for writers to write, canon letters back and forth between
Right.
characters, right? And then you have on top of this layer of a fan of the show translating it into English so that the rest of us, because the script book isn't available in English at this time, for us to be able to enjoy it. So thank you to Shin Ha-eun and thank you to at Lovely Shin Min Na for translating this for all of us. This is a letter that Dushik is writing to Haejin. He is lying next to her in bed. It's a snowy morning. She's still asleep. As you listen to this, everybody to think about him in this episode alone in his house sick, in his bed sick, the way he struggled with accepting her care, and how he kind of slowly began to realize he enjoyed it. These are the excerpts from the letter. I still sometimes feel like I'm dreaming of a scenery that you are with me. Sometimes it's hard to believe that we live in the same house. Of course, when I see the mess that you've made in the kitchen, I immediately think it's reality. Only one Yu Heijin came into this house, but this house is no longer the house it used to be. I love the sound of your laughter floating around the house where I've been alone for a long time. It's cute to hang your wet towel back in the bathroom, and it's nice to shake the wine with Yoon Hae-jin written on it. I like it when you hang the laundry and hum to a DOS song. I like it when you call me to go to the room or yard for no reason. It's also nice to forget that you are as heavy as the sack of the rice, and I will run far away only for you to hop on my back. I like your hair attached to each of my clothes. It's like you are buried all over my life. Haejina, every day is the most precious when I wake up in the same bed with you, cook and eat warm rice, and fall asleep with you again. I've missed this bustle, the warmth, for so long. Without you, I would never be able to come out of the dark by myself. Even at the moment that I hesitated if I could dare to be happy, and even at the moment when I couldn't be honest with you, you've always been brave enough to stay with me. Thank you for not letting me go. We'll leave off his letter there and come back to it later in the podcast. Any thoughts about that, Beat? Oh
I
my
feel like we
God.
should have recorded that part separately.
Because I might cry.
Yeah, now I'm just I'm just pretty stuck with silence. The way that she allowed him, meaning Shin Ha-eun, it through this letter, obviously that she wrote, but even still, the way that she allowed his character to open up and to call back to so many events that we saw. eh, I mean, yeah, I've never seen anyone do this. And
Yeah.
it's incredible. And I know that specifically one thing really steps out to me that we have said numerous times. It's not that one is saving the other. It's just that they're going on this journey together. And the line, without you, I would never be able to come out of the dark by myself. It just hits so hard because it is about that communal aspect. And yes, she's the one that he makes that first contact with to be able to kind of give him that courage, but the way that it changes his entire life and the way that he interacts with his community afterwards, it's just beautiful because constantly throughout this journey with the two of them, they're just saving each other in different ways. And like, isn't that just normal? And I think that's what's beautiful about it is it's just life.
Yeah. Well, it's just what love can bring to your life. It's also the way that Shin Ha-eun is able to demonstrate love in all of those small ways. So in this episode, it's, a bag of tangerines or a tea or making porridge for somebody, right? Showing up when they're sick. And in this letter, it's a song being hummed, eating rice together, being able, there's always going to be a mess in his kitchen, but now it's like, because someone's filling his house, right?
Right.
It checking in with this like future douchik who's looking back, and the moment that we're in with him now, he describes in the future as the moment of hesitation if I could dare to be happy. And that's what he's stuck in right now. And, this journey is so worth it because we get to see the two of these people at the end of this journey and everything that they bring to each other's lives. And it's really, it's a very straightforward and yet really powerful story and how transformational love can be for people's lives, like what we can be for one another. This story is also very clear-eyed of how we can really do damage to one another with very careless and hurtful words.
In all different kinds of relationships as well.
All kinds. Marriage, friendship, blaming strangers for things that they weren't responsible for, casual conversations while a boy is listening at a funeral, right? Like all of these like big and small ways, whether it's out of grief or out of carelessness, but you name it, it does serious damage.
I thought about this at the beginning when we were speaking about big picture, about the ways that people can harm each other and how some might seem so slight and so small. And it made me think of my aunt is an elementary school teacher. And I think this came out of a book, but I don't know what it was called and whatever. It holds very well. They use tissue paper and it's cut into a heart. And then they crumple it up and they undo it. And it's all about how people's hearts get wrinkled. Because there's no way, no matter how flat you put it, no matter how much you iron it out, if you will, there's always a remnant of the way that that heart was wrinkled by being hurt by somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about even the smallest acts leaving a mark on somebody like that, it just really brings things into perspective about a lot of the things we've been saying, what they might be going through and attempting to kind of rein yourself in, because you may just be adding to a wrinkle and making it even worse. And I found that, especially for her to show, 7-year-olds, found it just a beautiful way to physically demonstrate what we as people can do to each other.
Yeah. I mean, another one that they do with kids is they'll take a jar and they'll fill it with compliments. And for every compliment, you get a jelly bean and you fill the jar up. And then one mean thing can mean that the entire jar gets dumped out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, this story, especially when we get to episode 15, is going to show us sort of, she's going to slowly unfold for us through flashbacks all of the really damaging things that people said to Dushik that he deeply internalized and are these internal wounds that is what's holding him back right now. Future Dushik is saying, we are in the moment of hesitation, and we are going to be in this moment of hesitation with him until he finally gives in the middle and like just literally gives in the middle of the confession scene.
Yeah. I think that the worst thing that anyone can say about you is something you already believe about yourself, because it just compounds that. And or something that you are apt to believe about yourself that you may not have been, acutely aware of, but if it somehow fits in with the narrative that you tell yourself about your own life, it
Yeah.
compounds so much so for him to think, and already feel guilty,
Hmm.
but then he has his young wife, he has the security guard's son, he has these families, telling him how utterly awful he is. It's every little bit of it just stacks that up into what else could he possibly believe until someone who comes along who's willing to, accept who he is and who he used to be.
It's really a gift that Shin Ha-eun obviously loves these characters so much that she wrote this letter and showed us different sides of it. And one thing to keep in mind, Mi-son said throughout this episode, you're a dating rookie. Hae-jin in her letter will tell Ju-shik, I never confessed to anyone in my life. So this is all so new for both of them. And we're going to see all of the giddy and beautiful ways, the very funny and kind of silly ways, right? That they are going to be dating novices with one another, but they are kind of on this, right now it's this parallel journey that they're feeling so many of the same things. Their feelings are bubbling up to the surface. They're expressing that they care for one another through acts of service, but they can't quite say it yet. We're on this journey with you all rewatching, and someday Dushik's going to be lying next to his wife writing this letter and looking back on what we're unpacking right now on this journey is just really beautiful.
So we did it. One more down. Next time we have episode 9 coming up, and that's about meeting the in-laws, known or unknown. We have a couple of exciting guests coming up. Hilarious TV recapper Tony Maggio will join us for episode 9 to break down all the family dynamics. She actually lives in South Korea right now, which is
She
really cool.
does,
So we're
yeah.
excited to have her. And then for episode 10, we have fanfic and romance writer extraordinaire Gino to come and celebrate one of the greatest romantic comedy episodes of TV ever.
Episode 10. Oof, it's around the corner, beep. That one's going to be 4 hours long. Might be a two-parter. We are officially at the halfway point with our rewatch, and we just wanted to stop and thank all of you listeners for coming along on this journey with us, flailing and laughing and obviously sometimes crying because of this beautiful story. We have heard from listeners from everywhere, from the Philippines to Qatar to Northern Ireland to Argentina to Canada, literally all around the globe. And it just absolutely blows our mind. And we just love hearing from you all and are just really grateful that you all take time out of your lives to just listen to us, flail about TV. So thank you so much. Again, please send us things you've been thinking about or discussion topics or questions you would like to talk with us about when we do our upcoming Twitter Live. We'd love to do it now that we're here at our halfway point. So please reach out to us on Twitter at TV Banshees or on our website, streamingbanshees.com.
And in the meantime, if someone tries to take care of you by giving of themselves, just eat the porridge, okay? No matter how bad it tastes, just eat the porridge. Until next time, we'll see you soon.